Welcome back to Acts Midweek Study. We're in week 2, and I hope that you're reading the daily devotions, getting a lot out of them, and going to the weekend messages so that you can get the most out of the book of Acts. Last week we looked at the big theme number 1, which was crossing the first cultural barrier with the message of Jesus Christ. Let me get my little whiteboard out. And we looked at the fact that the message went from just being from the Hebraic Jews to extending through to the Hellenist Jews. Now today we're going to be looking at the next cultural barrier, and it's actually a category that I haven't got in here. And so let me show you where this kind of fits, and it's a little bit tricky. But here we have Jews and then God-fearers down here. We would put in here another group called the Samaritans. Samaritans. The Samaritans. Why do the Samaritans sit there? Well, in 721 BC, when Assyria invaded Israel, they carried off a bunch of people, but those that remained were taken and they were intermarried with. So these Samaritans were like half-breed, that's what they called them, half-breed Jews. And the Jews hated them. They were considered like they were just hated. So just thinking about that for a moment, where have you heard the phrase Samaritan before? You've probably heard it in the context of a good Samaritan. A Samaritan is considered a good person. So I'm just going to put this down and we'll continue on the study. Context. Stephen has been accused in the previous chapter of blaspheming the name of Moses and has responded to that accusation by giving a blow-by-blow account of how the whole Moses narrative was leading to fulfillment in Jesus. Rather than respond, the Jews around him like, wow, that's a really interesting argument. We need to think about that. They actually got completely incensed because he gave the whole history and they were tracking right with him. And then he begins to talk about Jesus and they get mad and they pick up stones and they actually kill him. The mob went wild. But as any blow the enemy tries to serve, it actually serves only to further God's kingdom and God's purpose for those who love him and are called according to that purpose. And the persecution of the stoning of Stephen and the fear that struck drove Jews out of Jerusalem and into neighbouring regions. The message has gone from Jerusalem through Judea and now out to Samaria. And a guy called Philip begins to evangelize the Samaritans. So Samaria, you might know the story of the Good Samaritan. Samaritan is synonymous with someone who does good deeds now. We know of organisations like Samaritan's Purse who provide presents, Christmas gifts for the poorest of the poor children who have never received a Christmas gift. Amazing. But Jesus told this parable about the Good Samaritan to disorientate his Jewish audience. That, like, you know, Sherlock Holmes, discombobulation. It would have been like going to a meeting of white supremacists and making the hero of the story a black guy who helped out an injured white supremacist. That's the kind of cultural divide that we're talking. It would be like going to an old boys gathering of Knox Grammar are getting a run, these series, and saying that a good feminist helped the misogynist out. It was opposite ends of the spectrum being brought together to show the goodwill deficit in the hearers. That was the whole point. So pause the video now and as a group read through Luke chapter 10 verse 25 to 37 and John chapter 4 verse 1 to 42 to get an understanding of Samaritans in the cultural context. So, as mentioned, the Samaritans were half Jew, half Gentile. When you consider just how much Jews would not associate with Gentiles at all, how do you think they would have viewed Samaritans? It says in Luke, you just read it, the Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. Being the result of the Assyrian invasion, everything about Samaritans was offensive to Jews. So, consider the fact that the Jews considered it so vitally important to worship at the temple. Remember the woman at the well, she says to Jesus, where should we worship? And now go back and read Stephen's indictment of the Jews in Acts 7, 46 to 50, and pay careful attention to what he says about worship. Acts chapter 7, 47 to 50, it'll come on the screen, and just pause it and have a read of that now. Can you see why the Jews were so angry? In just a moment, as a group, you'll read through Acts chapter 8. And can you see how the signs and wonders made way for the message? There's a few questions in the end of the study guide. Go through those, read through Acts chapter 8, and have a great discussion time.